So, just in case this conversation ever sees the light of day, we should maybe set some context about sort of why you and I are having this conversation. Certainly want to give you an opportunity to say something about it. But for me, I've known you for at least 3 years, maybe even 4 years now. Does that sound about right? Um, I know you've taken circling training and have attended a number of events in Toronto that me and my wife have led. I've always sort of enjoyed your energy and your presence, and you've also shown up before in other events, and I've really appreciated the way you've contributed your self-awareness, the degree at which you seem to be sort of in touch or plugged into the moment, to the degree of ownership that you have. So that's sort of had me excited to have a conversation with you. And we've been sort of trying to do that for a number of months now, and for various reasons, it never quite lines up. But I'm glad that we're able to give this a shot now. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about sort of like our connection.
I'm excited for this. I've always felt like like you were my first experience of authentic relating and circling. You're the first person that I circled with, or the first, I think you're even the first person I had a circling games experience with. I'm pretty sure either you or Josh, but both of you are very deep in the circling realm. So I got really acquainted with what it really is, because you're so deep in it, and you're embodying it. So in some ways you really showed me the potency of showing up in a present way and owning my experience. I really got like firsthand experience of that when I met you. So yeah, it was like a bit of a vortex experience, because I was just like, whoa, like what is this magic? And it was sort of hard to put words to, but the whole process of circling is learning how to put words to that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm feeling, I would say that my experience of circling and authentic relating in general is just, it's one of the best tools I've ever picked up on my path of personal development. I've done a lot of work over the years, but this is my favorite tool. It's my favorite tool, and I talk about it all the time. I talk about it all the time to people, because it is the thing. It is one of the big, more significant puzzle pieces that make communication, at least in my experience, effective, and it helps land for people, being connected to that internal space. People can relate to that. So yeah, I'm feeling really grateful to be part of the conversation, to have this like kind of full circle moment, no pun intended, years later. It's really cool. I'm excited. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that sort of brings up for me, just in terms of context. Well, I think a lot of the stuff that we do in circling will probably be present in our conversation. We're not actually here to do circling, but it's sort of a piece of a greater exploration or experiment, in terms of having even more complex conversations where we're including our I and our we sort of perspectives, along with topics that we might be talking about, to help make sense of them, from the objective as well as the subjective, like the way in which we're impacted by it and how we have the conversation. So to me, that's the most important thing about this, not how accurate we are about any particular content we might bring. Like we might actually really be just sort of coming in with hot takes on some things. But I think it's more or less like challenging ourselves to be maybe a bit more on the edge of our thinking in that more exploratory place, and really just trying to highlight or practice how we have a conversation about things, more than whether or not it's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that sort of brings me to the most recent reason I sort of reached out was you had asked this question on social media, which I think you said something, was it like, how do you know if you've exited the matrix? Was that it? How was it worded?
Yeah. How do you exit the matrix?
How do you exit the matrix? Yeah. Yeah. And I felt really, there's something I find that's a thing that you tend to do really well, is sort of the way you ask questions. Certainly on social media, it tends to get a lot of engagement. And I always sort of want to participate, but that particular format it requires like coming back to it and checking to see what other, it's like, oh, there's too much commitment in that. I'd rather just like sit down and talk with you
Yeah.
sort of about that. But I also know that that was a while ago, and we were sort of talking earlier about, we'll have to see what aliveness is here, but we're going to try starting there. And yeah, I'm sort of curious where you're at with that question. You were sharing a bit about what the consensus seemed to be with what people were responding. I'm also curious whether or not that aligns for your perspective. So yeah, I wonder if you can maybe kick us off a bit about where you're at with that question.
Yeah. So as we were talking about earlier, we were just, I was telling you how I brought this conversation back alive in another forum just to kind of become reacquainted with the question, because I really wanted to maintain that coming into this, that freshness. And I'd say that the consensus, it's hard to say the consensus like without describing what the matrix is and what the consensus of what the matrix is. And so would it be cool if I start there?
Yeah. And I imagine we might even have slightly different perspectives. So it'll be good to sort of hear what your definition is and the orientation where you're coming from, and then see if there's maybe a place we can meet.
I love that. I would love that. So in a lot of the responses I was getting, a lot of people were saying that the matrix is the programming. It's like the computer it's like if you imagine a computer in its pure state without any programming, that's like being outside of the matrix, and being in the matrix is all the programming, the social conditioning, the indoctrination, all the different ideologies, all the ways that we experience reality and ourselves has all been taught to us, and we've all been it's all been handed down, and the stories we tell ourselves and all of that. So the matrix, in my understanding, I guess I could say, is I agree with that, in that it is the programming, and it's something that we can, like a lucid dream, for example, wake up inside of. And we don't have to, a lot of people were saying, in order to exit the matrix, you have to die, like to get out of the programming. But I actually think that, in order to get out of the dream, you could wake up and start walking around, or you could wake up inside of the dream and realize, oh my gosh, this is a dream, and actually use, be there in a more effective way, in a more informing way. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, sort of the way I'm hearing it is, the reflections you've been getting back is that it's programming, but it sounds to me it's more social programming. So more specifically, your culture, your environment is sort of influencing the way you see things, and there might be a difference between that unconscious perception and what we might know as like objective reality, like what's actually underneath all that. And yeah, I'm curious a bit on the dream part. I think once you invoked the dream piece, it sort of reminded me that you've often, I say journal, but I mean, you're posting on social media, but it's very much like a journal, and you seem to have very vivid dreams, and you remember them, and you generally present them and talk about them. So I can imagine that being a really potent frame for you, or like a reference. But yeah, so I was also hearing, that people were suggesting that you have to die to really exit it, but it sounded to you that it's like you could notice in the dream that you're dreaming.
Right.
Yeah, and then my guess is what happens from that is, after that is sort of making a conscious choice, like through recognizing you're dreaming, sort of that idea of like you're subject to something. So you're not aware you're dreaming. Then you're aware that you're dreaming. Well, now that I'm dreaming, I have a choice. Does that fit for you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what would the choice be, or how does that sort of manifest for you that would like lead the exiting? Like once you're aware, you've exited because now it's in your awareness, it's salient to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just draw parallels with what it's like to wake up inside of a dream, just to help this make more sense so you can understand my frame a little bit. So being in a dream, and I wake up inside of a dream, a really common trend, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is that you get excited. You get really excited. Oh my God, it's a dream. Maybe you want to run around and start telling everybody it's a dream too, and start trying to convince all the characters to like wake up or something. And it's really ineffective strategy, and it's a kind of a waste of energy. And the excitement naturally just ejects us out of the dream, and we wake up in the other way. So the trick is to, when you notice that you're dreaming, there's this awareness. It's like an experience. It's like, whoa. And then you just sort of get really present, and it's easy to get like filled with this awareness. You want to share it with everybody, but you can't take that feeling and give it to somebody. You could, I think what I'm seeing a lot, excuse me, out in the world is people trying to convince other people that this is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's COVID reality experience we're having.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are trying to wake other people up. And what's happening is a lot of conflict. And that's what happens inside of a dream, is conflict. You go up to a dream character and you say, hey, this is a dream. And their mouth disappears. They can't communicate to you. Something happens and you eject, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and I'm going to come back to how this is applicable in reality, but in the dream, harnessing this, like centering experience and coming into a place of just walking with that confidence and that knowing, and asking questions to the dream characters, getting curious about what they think about how this world works. And I do the same thing in dreams as I do out there. And I feel it's very relevant. This waking up process happens. And I can engage in this waking up process in dreams and in the same way in reality. And so that's why I like asking questions on social media. I don't like telling people that we're dreaming. I like inviting people to think about what they think about this dream that we're all in together. And so much more comes out of it. It's way more of an enlivening experience for me, and I think for other people too.
Mm-hmm. There's something sort of noticing, and you just sort of named it, of like you having, the way I'm hearing is this experience that you often have, I guess, in dreaming, is this thing where you want to turn around and talk to others in your dream about this awareness that you've now had, this consciousness that has sort of landed for you in the dream. And then certain things are happening, obviously, with the characters such that they can't actually respond. So I find that really interesting, primarily because I don't think I've ever had that experience when dreaming. And I mean, my recall of my dreams and everything else is nowhere near what yours is. But I've certainly had that experience of being in a dream, and then being consciously aware, like this is not real. And almost like holding that dual observer, like me self role in the dream, where the dream's sort of playing out and I'm sort of watching it. I'm sort of sitting behind watching it. There's something interesting about that, because that occurs to me is how I tend to show up in real life, and like in the gross world. And you were mentioning sort of this parallel of like what you're doing exterior, and it's also happening in your dream, or maybe it started happening in your dream and then you brought it outside. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting to me, just seeing those two things, how they're different and yet how they both seem to reflect something about the way we are in the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is really, I don't know what else to say about that. I just find it quite fascinating.
Yeah. It's like we have a personality that isn't associated to the body. It's just, of course, it's this invisible thing inside of us. But I think that we can gather tools from the dream world, and we can gather tools from the waking life, and they are interchangeable. Mm-hmm. But I think that we have more clarity and understanding of certain aspects of this dream or certain aspects of this program, depending on where we're at, which realm we're in. And I think both realms are relevant, and kind of similar in how we navigate it. Learning how to interchange and take tools to the other side is like it's almost like a natural experience, like what you're describing, how you are when you realize you've got this sort of feeling. It's hard to describe and give to somebody else, right? You can't, it's hard to describe that feeling. We could try, it could be fun, but it's like ultimately it's our own personal experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you want to tie that to the Matrix exiting What do you think? Do you think I just tied us in a knot there with this dream parallel?
No, no. Well, I mean, there was another piece that I wanted to sort of look at, but I also didn't want to go too far, so that it was hard for us to sort of come back to sort of. So maybe I'm still, I'll say this small piece because I don't think there's much to talk about. But what it brings up for me is this question around this idea of consciousness. And my understanding, I don't know who it is, but I've heard somebody that I deem credible share it. So I think this has been said. But it's this question about, trying to figure out how the mind works and how consciousness works. And one hypothesis is that when we go to sleep, essentially that consciousness dies and we're actually rebuilding it every time we're waking up. And one thing that I would potentially use to poke a hole, and maybe there's all sorts of other holes to poke in that, I've never really actually thought about it. It just came out now. But it's like, oh, if we're actually carrying some part of our awake consciousness into how we behave in our dream, that implies to me that is not stopping, that something about that is still carried forward. Or even if it works the other way and it's something that is more causal about us, and then we become aware of it in our more alert state, and then we start using it out there, it still applies that there's a connection, rather than this idea that, when you're dreaming, you're your most true self. You just rebuild that, your waking consciousness each time you wake up. So I found that a little bit interesting, and it sort of puts me a little bit more into this camp of, there's a thread tying them together, which it certainly sounds like you certainly believe. We just use different words to articulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the dream self is the most accurate self or anything, but it's almost like the terrain or the landscape or the experience that we can have that gives us these moments where we get to experience that, if we're lucky, these experiences where we wake up literally inside of the dream and we get to have that memory and we get to process that and refer back to that actual felt sense experience that we have in that memory, which I don't know how often we get to have that experience out here. And I don't know that it happens in the same way or that it even feels the same way, but I have touched on things that kind of feel like that, where it's like, whoa, what is this,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe that does tie sort of back into this idea of the matrix. And I guess maybe what I would sort of share is how I take the idea of the matrix. In that I think I would agree that it's programming, but to me, I probably see it more as a cognitive machinery, or sort of like more of a naturalistic sort of account, rather than a more like a social science or soft science sort of piece. So for me, when I sort of find myself commenting about like seeing the matrix, it's almost like seeing the underlying machinery that drives our desires. So it's almost like there's the projected self, or the self that's safe to turn around and show the rest of the world, which many of us call ego, but even the ego can wear masks and alter itself. And it's, so to me, that's like the constructed matrix that's sort of happening is, and yes, that's influenced by social things, because we can develop traumas and we can have like contractions and things that happen to us at a certain age that create a coping mechanism that then turns around and affects our behavior. And then you can have somebody like, oh my God, that Misha, and this is not specifically about you, is such a nice, she's always so nice and always smiling. And maybe, the fact is you're so nice and smiling because that was what you needed to do to get attention from your parents. And it's like that revelation, that sort of thing, to me is like the thing that starts to introduce the crack, or starts to show the code of the matrix. It's like, oh, this thing that I'm doing, this way that I'm being in the world, is the manifestation of this programming.
Yeah.
Yet I feel like we share this programming. So it doesn't have to necessarily be something that happened to me in reactivity to somebody else socially, although so much of our behavior is formed from that. But I think you can also have even just your own perception of something, where if, when you're a child, you really like doing this one particular thing, and you just continue to carry it over into your adult life, and realizing like, why do you still play a car, why do you still play with cars, or why are you collecting Star Wars, figurines, at 40 years old, and it's like, yeah, why do I do that? And it's sort of that thing of like the automatic reactive behavior and then the underlying, reason or explanation for that. And to me, that's the real world, that objective world that, so many sciences, psychology and linguistics and, obviously cognitive science is trying to really say like, this is the way the mind works. This is what the self is. This is what cognition is. And to me, bringing awareness and plugging into that knowledge, to me, that's the thing that helps me exit the matrix, in that I'm not captive to the matrix. So I'm still probably going to socially interact with you in a particular way. I want you to like me, or I want to keep the peace, or whatever that is. And that serves some other reason. But I can also like notice and witness myself like, oh my God, why am I like talking so fast? Like, like it's happening right now. I'm like talking so fast. What's that about? And I can bring like consciousness to it and like, oh, right. I'm just like really excited about what I'm talking about, and I'm like feeling all this energy. And, so it starts to, from the integral perspective, it starts to be the it that's driving what's happening becomes that perspective. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that the exiting of it is just more and more the revealing of the things that obscure the deeper layers of our functioning.
Yeah, the revealing. It's almost like we go into this program or this programming experience where we enter into this world as pure as we can be, and then we traverse through this landscape which basically encodes us with different programs. And then at some point in our lives, I mean, I don't know if this happens for everybody, but for a lot of people I'm talking to, we've reached a point where we are realizing, oh, what is this? What is this program here? What is that? Why do I do this? And then, so moving forward, the rest of the path is just this, you can't hide from yourself anymore, because now you're starting to see more and more. And the more you practice staying in that perspective, what you're describing in the dream, how you feel like you're just sort of a little bit outside of it, being like, oh, this is a dream. You can't, now that you have this knowing, more and more realizations come to awareness. And we can't pretend anymore. We can't, it's hard to commit to that role when we are outside of it, when we're no longer invested in it. It was like a role we were playing because we were so committed, because there was a really good reason to play that role. And then suddenly we just lose the steam. We lose the steam or something. It's hard to explain, but suddenly the steam's not there. And it's like, how am I supposed to, this doesn't feel right for me anymore. It doesn't feel integral. It doesn't even feel like me. What is this? And then there's this inquiring process and pulling away. And yeah, that's life. That's the stage a lot of us are at, I think, right now.
Well, I think it's interesting that you name stages, because I do sort of see this as a developmental thing. And generally, while we don't all progress developmentally the same way, some of us can get to a later stage in life and not actually progress that far. But there is generally an age bracket that sort of fits to where we start to do some of these things. So, like the very basic, Keegan model is, most people are still in that socialized consciousness. So it makes sense that if you're in the socialized consciousness, where the thing that I'm most subjective to is like wanting to make sure that you and I are okay, and that you don't like exclude me from the group, right? So I want to belong, right? And I have belonging needs. And in my belonging needs, I will go along with whatever thing else is happening. And I won't even question it, because I'm getting whatever my needs are met by being included in the group. And therefore it's like, yeah, okay, I will do this and I will do all that without any conscious thought to it. I'm not waking up. I'm not awoke or woke, even though it's a contentious term these days, but it's sort of that process of waking up. And I think that's the thing, is to the degree at how deep we have woken up to the underlying controls that have us behave the way that we are in the world, tells us how deep we're into or not, or captive to the matrix. So yeah, I totally see this developmental, because then you're sort of entering in that stage of self-authoring, so once you move out of the socialized part, it's like, well, hang on a second, I don't have to do what you're doing, because actually, chances are maybe you'll appreciate me or I've had the sense like, oh no, actually, I get like, it's okay that you and I disagree about this thing. You're not actually going to oust me. So actually, you accept me as I am. And therefore, it's like, oh, well, who am I? Right? Then it's like, okay, well, now that I'm not connected to you and having to do that thing, who am I? And then I have this opportunity to sort of create my own ideology, like to use that term, and like, who am I and what's important to me? And there's that growth. And then, of course, that allows us to move into a self transcending stage. Again, not everybody gets there, but once you can sort of get to that, then you can create your own matrices, then you can sort of start reformulating reality to a certain degree. But that's still why I say, like, I think it's more the cognitive or human machinery underneath it, because even though we can choose to see things differently, there's often a reason why we're choosing to look at it that way. Because then it's like, oh, this is more aligned with who I am, or I get more energy by looking at it this way. And it's really painful for me to look at it this way. And it's not that I'm escaping anything. It's just, it's really complex and I got to choose something. I'm going to go with the thing that doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a benefit to going through the, I don't know what you want to call it, for lack of a better term, default reality program, like whatever we just get handed? Do you think there's a benefit to that, going through that and then creating our own matrix situation? Or can a being come into this planet, have really cool parents or interesting parents who just want to help them bypass that or something? I guess they're just indoctrinating them in a different way. I don't know that there's ever a way out of it, but do you think there's a way to
I don't
invite them to create their own matrix or something? Or maybe they won't even be able to function in society. Maybe they have to do this.
Well, I guess maybe the thing that I would say as a parent, having some, mind, I didn't really start, waking up. I didn't really start doing personal development work and really trying to figure out who I was and stuff until she was already a few years old. So that sort of happened after she was born. But the experience that I've had is this awareness of the way that things are, this awareness of the way that I think I would like to see things be, and sort of helping at least her in sort of parenting her, is like helping her sort of accept and set her up for the way that things are, while being open to and sort of keeping another foot or attention over there to to sort of be in a way that would help create more of the way that we want things to be. So I think it's quite, I guess it really depends, right? I like the question. I think it really depends, because I would see lots of caveats to, say, raising a child right now and creating I guess we'll say a home environment. Let's say they were homeschooled, because once they go to school, that other world sort of comes crashing in, the way that things are. And let's say you had like a little community of people like this, so that they still got the socializing in as well. So, I mean, you have to create something. You have to kind of segregate that community to not have these other influences come in. Maybe there's a way you can do it without that. But if you had set them up for the way in which you want things to be, the ideal, and let's assume that we actually have a shared ideal of what's best for humanity, I think something would get lost. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I think of developmental theory, which I think of a lot, and I frame a lot of how I make sense of the world. I look at developmental theory, and I think you have to go through all those other stages in their natural form. And I think there's probably a good cognitive science. Well, I'm certain there's a good cognitive science reason for it, because of the way that modeling works, the modeling machinery of the brain. I think you have to go through those things. One slight hot takey example would be, there's a difference of years between us, but there's certainly a generation of kids, that had what were known as the Zamboni parents. And these were the parents that went and wiped all the snow off the ice. They cleared the path of conflict and problems and resistance from them. And what we seem to have now as a result is there's not a lot of, they're not anti-fragile. They don't have the resilience because they haven't necessarily really struggled. And that becomes the clashing of the way the rest of the world is. So can you silo a group? Sure. I mean, they found some indigenous tribes somewhere not too many years ago that, you know, had never even encountered the rest of humanity, and they seem to go on with living perfectly fine without that. But I think that's super hard to do. And if you're going to have them be a part of the bulk of the rest of the world, I think, yeah, to not go through those stages, those interpersonal conflicts with people who think differently than you, you're not going to build resilience. You're not going to have emotional, what do you want to call it, agility, toughness. It's going to be even probably a little bit difficult to find compassion in certain ways. And you won't have that difference that I think is so important. You know, one of the things that was so great for me with circling, not really having done any real emotional work beforehand, was I just constantly projected everywhere. And I just figured, like, I didn't think I was anything special. And it's like, if I can do it, what the hell's your excuse? Why can't you do this? Because I'm not special. But then going through circling and sort of like, and then getting it, and then connecting on an emotional level and seeing that somebody struggle, even though it's an easy thing for me, I have nothing but empathy. Like, I can now empathize with them. Like, oh my God, yeah, that sounds hard. And I'm not evaluating the content. I'm more connecting to their actual direct emotional experience. And that really helped me develop so much more empathy for other people. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I don't think it would work. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of siloing, you know, and a lot of people talk about it, building communities and just staying within their community. But I think there's a real danger with that if you ever have to exit that community, or that other world comes crashing in, whether that's war, whether you wanted it or not, it's at your doorstep, or a pandemic, to whatever degree that, you know, you're on board, that, you know, that's out there. Yeah, I think it's tricky. It sounds like a great ideal, and I don't see anything in history to suggest that we can pull it off.
Yeah, it gets me thinking of Lord of the Flies. If you know, you put Lord of the Flies, all the kids on the island, I think it would just look a lot like what we're doing. It's just younger versions. They would just set up the same kinds of systems. It's almost like a program that's innate in our survival and our needs for survival. We need the contrast, we need the hierarchies, or I don't know if we need hierarchy, but
Well, it sounds like evolutionarily we do. That's what the evolutionary biologists say. I know Peterson has talked about that and has gotten flack for it, and is the joke about lobsters, but it's like, what's out there in the natural world, you know, that's not as socialized the way we are. How do they behave? And it's like, those are there's hierarchies. This is the way in which they behave. Yeah.
yeah, and to imagine like anything else, like there's the hierarchy is the structure like a pyramid, and what's the alternative, like when you imagine the shape, like I heard this somewhere and I don't know where I heard it from, but it's almost like the matriarchy is the or something is like the, if you instead just sort of flatten it so that it's like a network or it's a grid. And so instead of there being, and we actually are kind of doing something like that by nature, we are naturally doing this with the internet, and memes, and the virus itself, that the shape of the virus, the way a virus works, it doesn't need a hierarchy. It doesn't need like some grandmaster virus to like make it all work, right? Like the virus is just like spreading across the landscape of the flat terrain. So yeah, it's like interesting that we need this shape. We need this kind of shape to help shape us as we move through our experience. But
well, I think a frame, that again, we can sort of see out in the natural world that has nothing to do with humans and the way we socialize, is you can look at nature and you can look at the chaos and the order of nature, right? So nature is a organizing system, and any self-organizing system has that mixture of chaos and order, and I just don't think we can eliminate the chaos from social animals, which we certainly seem to be, to do that. And, even again, that idea of like, okay, you create the ideal. Well, what's the reason for the ideal? Well, the ideal is to remove suffering. Okay, well, that sounds noble and a good thing to do because I don't want anybody to have undue suffering. But do you get to this place where you've just flattened everything such that there's no richness? I mean,
Yeah.
can you really have joy without experiencing pain? What the hell is joy if you don't know what pain is? So I think those are super important questions and frames that I don't have an answer for, that you can really actually enjoy life without having moments when it's not enjoyable.
Right. It's like we're dependent on this. We need that sort of shape. I don't know how else to describe it. This is just helping me right now to get there. But when I imagine, if say we were to flatten everything, I don't even think I can fathom it. Like my consciousness can't even fathom what that would look like in human society, but also on a global picture with all of us trying to intermingle together in a flattened way. It's
Mhm.
kind of like we would just become like a field of daisies or something. Like we would just I don't know, like that's non-dual consciousness or something. Maybe like it's just snapping back into this, oh, we were just playing that game of being in this pyramid like shape and that hierarchy thing, and getting entangled in all of that. It's just the trip we were on, or the cosmic joke we subscribed to, or something to that effect.
Yeah, it occurs to me to sort of have that, let's say it was even possible to attain. What, how is that experience? Like there has to be, I assume there has to be some consciousness involved. Otherwise, there is just nothingness, but there is nothingness without the awareness of nothingness. And therefore, is that a thing that we want? Because how is that different depending on what your take is on afterlife? But if that's just death, then we've all got it coming anyways. That like that part of where you're feeling, sensing, and cognitive seems like it's going to actually end.
Yeah.
And you will decompose back into the very small cellular structures, and you'll be part of the universe once again. So that life cycle will definitely happen. um, I don't know too many people who are striving and looking forward to dying. I think some people have
Yeah.
sorted it out, and maybe if you're in a lot of pain, you want out of it. That makes sense. But yeah, I think sometimes that idea, if we do a meditation and we sort of take on like a cosmic sort of expanded awareness, there's something that's very pleasurable about that, or at least it is for me. Um, but there's a consciousness to it, and part of what's nice about it is it's also a break from the, I have responsibilities and I got to do this and I have to feed myself, and what's this cough about, whatever those like anxieties and things about being human. It's almost like a release, right? In some ways, some say it's sort of a return to like your essence, which I think is great. But something tells me you need that contrast. I mean, if you're going to feel something, your body needs to release. Is it serotonin? It's the good one.
Yeah.
And for it to release the serotonin, I think there has to be, like, I don't think you can be a serotonin 24 hours, 7 day a week generating machine. If you are, you're probably gonna kill your adrenals in some way, or overtax your body. So there's just something about it. Like, I just don't know if that's like a conscious experience that we can always have 24/7 anyways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe, I mean, I don't know if it's possible. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
don't know how reality works. That's the thing. I literally have no clue. And so every day I remind myself of this. I don't know. Like, this is the agnostic thing, I guess, the agnostic frame, and it's sort of like, it's something that frees me, but it's also something that I find a lot of suffering in, but like the not knowing helps me, and it also causes pain. Because there's this ceaseless quest to know, but then there's this sort of awareness that I may never know, or may never be able to comprehend the fullness of it with this limited meat suit brain computer that I have to work with.
And what's the downside to not knowing that?
To not knowing, the downside to not knowing why, well, I don't, to not knowing what happens, or what is this? Like, what's the downside?
Yeah, well, the way I was sort of hearing it is, like, I was hearing like there's some pain and there's sort of, there's the not knowing and like, but I don't know. And it's like, but is it okay to not know? And I sort of got the sense like you want to know.
I want
Like,
to know. I don't think I can know.
mhm,
And I don't think it's, I think just the nature of how I need to move through reality is that I'm on a quest to know. It's just the, how my life feels. I'm on a quest to know.
mhm,
But yet there's this a bit of humbleness behind that, because there's this awareness that um, I may never know from this perspective that I'm in right now. But it's a cool venture, go ahead and try to know, go ahead and make that journey, like see what that brings. And there will be some really colorful experiences and interesting conversations along the way, exploring and unpacking these things. But yeah, I don't go a day without thinking about mortality, thinking about the nature of existence. Like it literally never leaves I've been like this since I was a teenager. Just I would have these random experiences where I'm suddenly up. Like I remember as a teenager going to like the public washroom, sitting down to have a little pee or something, and then suddenly I'm struck with this one day you will have a final pee or something like that. It was just like a sort of finality to my experience all of a sudden. This, what if this was the last pee you ever had or something? And I was just like, I'm just trying to I'm just trying to take care of this system situation I have. Just give me a sec. I don't know who I'm talking to or whatever, but like, why did that happen? I don't know. And it happens to me all the time. It's like a force inside of me that it's like, stay awake, stay awake inside of the dream. Don't forget, it's gonna end. Yeah.
wow. That's, yeah. I'm, yeah, I'm struck and I don't actually know what to say about it. And there's like a part like, oh, I want to like slow down, like take like 20 minutes to try to figure out what's here for me. I feel like, a slight clench in my stomach, which is interesting for me.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like a lot of joy as you talk about it. However, I think I'm also projecting or experiencing some weight or heaviness, something around like the persistence of it.
Mm.
Um, like, like just hang on. Can I just be as I am right now and not have to contemplate um, super complex ideas that I may never know the answer to, anyways, or I don't actually think I can know the answer to.
Yeah.
Um, and yet I noticed something in me. It's like, I kind of like those questions, but yeah, they feel really expensive for me. I don't imagine, it doesn't sound like they're as novel to you. It sounds like they're persistent and constantly coming up. But I imagine the novel part is that you don't know, or as you said, you don't know, you don't think you can know, but you probably look at the question a little bit differently or the idea of an answer a little bit differently because you're different in every moment in one way or the other.
Mhm.
And therefore, that sort of tells me like, oh, it's probably persistently novel. It's always novel, even if it's the same question. There's, I don't know if that fits for you, but I imagine there's something new to consider or another perspective based on what's salient in your day or your week or that particular moment.
Mhm.
Um, Perhaps changes how you hear the question or how you want to answer it, even in the not knowing, or I don't never think I'll know, even if that's your deepest truth.
Yeah.
Does that fit?
Well, when you think about it, kind of there is a novelty to it. There is a novelty to it, but I would say what it, yeah, in that it keeps me here, and it usually happens in a default setting, like photocopier machine or something, like some
What's
monot.
here? When you say it keeps you here, what's the here?
It keeps me um, from falling asleep into this monotonous meow. I'm just a robot. Like it's in these things we do all the time. Brushing the teeth, going pee, using, I don't know. I used to use a photocopier a lot at work. It doesn't happen anymore, but it would happen then. It's just these moments where it was like almost like a persistent. It wasn't to make me feel afraid of death or something. I don't know what the purpose is or why it's happening or
Mhm.
my brain produces these thoughts, but it's almost like it reminds me to stay on my track. It's to stay on my mission and to not get swallowed by the monotony of existence, because there is a lot of novelty to experience, and we only have so much time, you know. And there's this like I just feel like back end to enjoy reality as much as I can, you know, back into just be here in the lusciousness of this experience. And regardless of whether they're hard experiences or soft experiences or easy or hard, like whatever, it's just, yeah, it's not, I noticed when I shared that, it was like, I know it was an intense share. And I often wonder if it lands really intensely for other people. I imagine that it does, because it's not a normal thing, I don't think, for other people. That's the regular feedback is, I don't know that I've met a lot of people who've told me that they have this experience. So there's a little part of me who felt even a little, oh, sorry about that. When you said that it was heavy and you felt that tightness. But then I also feel like it's sort of my function, to sort of share with this level of transparency, to provide a little bit of challenge for people. So I don't know, there's a bit of reconciliation coming back around, being like, oh, it's okay. You know, I used to feel a little bit, almost a sense of retraction coming back into myself and like wanting to keep that private, but it's like my natural expression is to just let it come out, and just do so in a way that's honest, but also that it's not scary to look at these things. It's not scary to me to become acquainted with looking at these things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like, thanks. Like, I think that's a thing, even if I wasn't able to articulate it before, I think that's just the thing I appreciate about you is I think I'm going to get, I don't know if I would necessarily say the deepest truth, but I'm going to get a lot of transparency with you and there. And so I think I feel like a fair bit of trust is like, you're going to share something and it's going to land, and I don't have to like parse it out and think, well, what's she really trying to say with that? You know, so with you sharing that, it's just like I'm appreciative because, you know, and I get that social part, like, ooh, did I,
Yeah.
but you know, my wish on that end is like, no, and I'm glad that you continue to lean into it and share it anyways, because you're allowing me to decide what I do with it, you know, and I can just disassociate, not let it land for me. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I don't really understand it, but anyways, so how's your cat doing? You know, or it's like to sort of stay open and just like, whoa, something just happened here, and like, how am I impacted? And like, be in relationship with you about it, you know, like read a bit more into the field of what it's like to be Misha, or how I experience you and your experiences in myself. And that feels like a gift. So the more that you're able to actually be more transparent or feel safe enough to be transparent, the more I'm going to get out of being in relationship with you. So even when it's uncomfortable, it's almost always appreciated.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
nice to hear. That feels really nice to hear. There's a lightning in that. It feels good to know that. I know that's not everybody's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's a sense of relief when I can share something like that where it's just like, okay, good. Like it was a little bit of tension, but now we're good. It's fine. And you can get something from it. You can learn and evolve, and it could be a puzzle. It's like, hey, is this puzzle for you? Oh, no, it's not for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sort of sounds like, I don't know if that's usually your experience, but I like the idea of like, you don't seem particularly attached. So it's like, I'm going to be me, and I'm going to share this, even though I know I might get a thing, and then I might feel a bit of, but you know, it's better for me. I'm imagining your thought is like, it's better for me to share it, or it feels better for me to share it. So therefore you're being more you, and maybe this particular expression isn't for you. So I offer it without, you know, maybe perhaps expectation. But you're still giving the other person a chance to be themselves in relationship with you, rather than what so many of us tend to do is manage the situation and try to control it because, well, you know, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I want you to associate hanging out with me as feeling comfortable. Like even as I start to talk about it, I'm sighing at the idea of what that whole thing is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I trust people. I trust people know how to handle information and how to receive information. Like we're connected to the internet. We can look at anything. Like, you know, kids can come across anything. Like, we have come across lots of stuff as we've grown through life, seen some intense experiences. So I trust that a conversation with a quality of depth to it, a quality of depth that touches on, the nature of what we're all here doing, it seems relevant and important to consider. And even if it doesn't happen very often for people to consider these things, I really don't mind being the person who pops up on their path and is like, hey, I had this experience once on the toilet. How do you feel about that? It's amusing to me. I don't know why. I don't know. But it's good. It feels good to me. Yeah. And I don't think anyone's going to die. Like, I'm sure they'll survive. You'll survive this. It'll be okay. And it could be funny too. It could be funny, but it's nice to find the edges to be like, oh, not there. Okay, cool. I respect that. It's okay.
Mm. No, I'm just like feeling that land a bit more and just kind of appreciating you, like how you show up. Yeah, I'm still also notices like I'm slowing down, like, oh, there's that piece still there, sort of in my stomach, about you sort of naming that, like, questioning of reality to help you be here. And I'm curious about that. I don't know if you want to explore it, but on one hand, it sounds like you want to stay awake, is one way that I was interpreting it. And one way to stay awake is to stay curious and question and try to make sense of your experiences, rather than, the contrast to that would be just to be in reactivity all the time, I guess. Not really conscious, not really thinking about anything, not asking any questions. But then I wonder, like, oh, like the persistence of it too. It's like, I wonder if there's like a dissociative part of it as well. And when I think of like dissociation, to me, it's almost like something's happening. And normally when I experience it, it's in relationship with somebody. And it's just like, suddenly the other person is like tuned out and I'm somewhere else. Right. And, the conventional wisdom on that is like something's happening in this interaction, this environment that I don't like, or I'm afraid of, or my nervous system's activated, and to protect me, it's sort of fading that out and distracting me over here. And I don't necessarily know that that's part of what's happening, because it sounds like you're just doing this monotonous task. It almost just sounds like when you're in the monotony and you're not actively doing something, this is just the thing that's in your background.
Mm-hmm.
And then when everything else is quiet, you hear that music.
Yeah.
Does that fit?
I don't know if it's the default thing that's back there. It seems like a mischievous character or something. If I could attribute like a personality to it or something, it is kind of like I don't know how to explain it. Actually, it doesn't seem like something outside of me either. Yeah, it's just kind of, we have thoughts all the time, drifting through our minds all the time. Mm-hmm. Most of it is just information being sifted through and processed, just skimming, how much time do we have in this meeting, blah, 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 like stuff like that. Yeah. And then there's one that might get stuck somewhere. And it's usually one like that. That's for whatever reason, those thoughts float through the river of my mind rather regularly. And I'm sure it's possible that some of them are going by unattended to, or unnoticed even, possibly. But every once in a while, maybe one gets lodged or something in the riverbed, and it's just like, there's this one wants attention for some reason. And then there's a little bit of handling and then let it go. It's not more important or anything, but it does kind of brings me to appreciating the river a little bit differently, appreciating the nature of my mind a little bit differently, and just becoming that observer, coming back into that experience of it. Yeah, it's almost like a walking meditation that it's calling me to do, or a waking meditation. Meditation feels right.
Yeah. And I'm curious because as you were sort of naming that, I was starting to build like a framework and a system for it. And I don't know what familiarity you have, but you used a number of words that were starting to plug into the frame that I was creating. So almost like an internal family systems perspective. Do you have that framework at all?
Well, I've done internal family system work before,
Yeah.
part work, yeah.
Yeah. So it was almost sounding like there's a part of you
Mm.
because and then it gets loud for whatever reason, although you said like something gets lodged in the river, which is an interesting is also, so I'm trying to reconcile like some of the words you use and the way you use them and how they fit into this frame, and then the distinction between the river.
Mm.
But it was sounding to me like then it sounded like almost like then you were attending to it, because the idea with IFS is there's a part and you sort of give it its attention, like you don't ignore it or try to dismiss it. You parent it, if it's a younger part, which it often is, by sort of giving it its due. So, hey, I've got this question about this existential thing over here. Although
Yeah.
that sounds like an older, wiser version of yourself, but and then it sounds like you giving it. It sounds like you feel compelled to give it attention. Like that's sort of what happens. Is it gets loud enough for you to sort of give it its attention, and then I'm sort of hearing doing that frees up the block in the river.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never actually considered whether this was a part until now. This is an interesting thing. And I'll probably sit with that after this conversation, and see what that brings up. But the idea of it being a part is intriguing to me. It's been with me for a long time.
Hmm.
And when I imagine it as a part, like I imagine there's a need, right, that it's asking to have met, and that's why it's so persistently showing up.
Mhm.
um, yeah, that's deep. That's a deep thing to consider. Whoa. Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. I don't know if there's anything that's immediately coming up for me, but the idea that it could be a part is intriguing to me.
Mhm.
And it's possible.
Yeah, there was just a few words that you used there, which obviously made it easier for me to fit, but they also didn't quite fit for the idea of just, because I know what it's like to have like, to me, my thoughts I articulate is like a ticker tape at the bottom of it, like a news channel, right? So there's all the like the shit that can come through, like, oh, I'm kind of warm, and oh, what am I gonna have for dinner tonight? Did I leave the garage door open? But it sounds like sometimes yours is like, what's the meaning of life comes by, or like something like that, and it's just like, what? It's like,
Yeah.
but it sounded like there's something about that particular one that comes through, and it sounded, I think you had said something like attended to, and there was like, yeah, right, that's something comes alive in me, it gets loud, I can't ignore it, and I have to attend to it if I want to go back to sort of functioning and using the meat suit and everything else in the way in which I need to.
Yeah, when I think about tending to it, it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of just being okay with it, or finding a way to relax in that moment. So when I think about my response to it, that's because it's so subtle and it's actually pretty quick. Like it doesn't, because it happens kind of regularly,
Mm.
it's just some phenomena that happens in my mind that I've become acquainted with. But yeah, as I move through that experience, processing that, it sort of hits me in a similar way. It's like right here. And then it's just like, whoa, lots of tension in the chest, or really intense, sort of almost like the wind got knocked out of me.
Mm.
And I'm like almost holding my breath. And then I have to like relax my body, like sort of just being okay with hey, I'm actually here though. Like I'm, I don't have to look at that right now. I'm not on the edge of life and death in the moment. In some ways it kind of feels like I visit that place, but as soon as I recognize that's not where I am, like I'm not dying in this moment, I can just keep carrying on, and appreciating the fact that I'm not there, or something like that. Um, Actually, as I say that, it makes me, I don't know how reality works. Like I said, sometimes I visit the idea of past lives and stuff like that. And as I'm talking about this, I wonder if it's a bit of residue, if that is a real thing, if it's a bit of residue on the on a previous life or something. It feels old though, whatever it is. I don't know. Maybe if there's a part that was formed, it's a formed as a result of coping with whatever residue is left over.
Mhm. Mhm.
That could all be metaphorical. I don't know how, if past lives are real. It could be just the complexity of our consciousness and how we make sense of our past.
Mhm. Yeah, and as a sort of consider that, what comes in is sort of the framing of the idea of past lives, and it's like that's might just be a particular language that we're using to explain a phenomena that exists because everything fits. It's a very elegant explanation. So I've certainly considered that sort of thing in terms of like what is something that I'm experiencing that's not necessarily mine, like this incarnation of me. Like clearly it's not. There's nobody else here, so it's not anybody else's. It's coming up here, but it also doesn't feel like it's a part of me. So, is that like a hidden part that has been in my shadow that I haven't paid attention to, or is that something else? Which I think is an interesting sort of question again about like you said, like how does reality work, and therefore like what is that thing that comes in that sort of creates this reaction? Yeah.
Yeah, in the frame of the matrix, where do you imagine like this phenomena that we're talking about here? I mean, I'm just asking you because you're in this conversation too, and we're doing this together.
Yeah.
How do you imagine that fits into this bigger picture? Like if you could imagine a purpose for why this phenomena pops up, or why we're even having this conversation, or whatever, just in the frame of the matrix sort of theme that we're on here, and understanding how this all fits. Yeah, like how, I guess what am I trying to ask here? Yeah, how do you see this fitting into the picture of understanding the nature of the matrix that we're all traversing?
Mm-hmm.
I think that came up in this conversation.
Well, I mean, I think the conversation is just a part of better sense making and sort of plugging in other experiences that aren't just my own, and other perspectives that are also coming from other frames. So, you might say, past lives, and I might map that to something in my mind that works more for me, but also has a lot of convergence in terms of ideas. So I think that just helps, like I think just through interacting with other people and other people's, even if they're subjective experiences, are still right. We're coming down to, okay, but what's the underlying thing that sort of creates that, and can I find that in me, and can I, maybe your frame is more useful than the frame that I currently have, and therefore it's like, oh, well, if I adopt your frame, or I try your frame on, maybe it adds a couple more branches that I can sort of lean out into. And then maybe I can make a connection to another frame where the gap was way too big with the frame that I had before. So having this conversation gives me an opportunity to sort of take my frame, and maybe you'll break the frame, and then I can reassemble the frame. But now it's bigger, or, that, whatever that,
Yeah.
or Japanese art thing is, where they fill it in with, and it's stronger than it was,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I see it as like puzzle pieces a little bit. Like it's like we're all walking around with like a little tray of pieces, and it's just sort of like, are you working on any area of the puzzle that any of these would be relevant for? Would you want any of these? It's just sort of like, let me see. It's like, that one's kind of interesting. Do you mind? Okay, thank you. Yeah, or I have two. It's like we're collecting them like the Pokemon cards or whatever you were talking about earlier. It's like, I don't actually need this one. Do you want it? Yeah. Or we're all assembling this picture together or something. It doesn't seem relevant to me, or I've already assimilated this, and so now I don't need it. It's like part of me or something.
I like your framing of the puzzle. Something about that seems more collective. Like you said, it's like we're all working on this really big. What is it? How is Wilbur referred to it? And I'm sure it's not where he got the phrase from, but that's where I know it from. Like the painting of all that is. So we're all working on the painting of all that is, and let's say it's a puzzle in this particular page. Everybody holds a piece of. Another way we could look at it is we all hold a piece of the hologram. And therefore, it contains everything, and it's also partial at the same time. So yeah, I like sort of that idea of like we're sharing the pieces, because we can't all see all the pieces at once, because that's just going to be, we can't, like, there's too many pieces. Like, where do I even begin? Where do I start sorting?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like something about that metaphor, that idea of sort of walking. And again, it's like the energy that you offer it. It's like an offering. It's like an invitation. Like, hey, do you want to? Almost like playful. Like, hey, do you want to play with me on
Yeah.
this super serious existential thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow it's like I'm trying to make it accessible, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I really like that because I don't think I do that. I'm coming in with like a cognitive science frame and developmental theory, and like, who the hell people can relate to a puzzle. So I like yours in terms of calling people in to participate with it. I think that's probably way more useful than the one that I'm using. Yeah, but that's how I would sort of see the conversations. Like, I think that's the whole reason to do them, and then hopefully, sort of the idea is that others would watch this or watch similar conversations, and they would also, again, using mine, break the frame and then reframe it, and it will influence how they have the next conversation. They'll go into more detail, or somewhere where they notice they're assuming what it means to, when you say that, to actually ask, well, hang on a sec, what do you mean when you say that? Are we talking about the same thing? Because so often, right, we're equivocating terms all the time, and then we're actually just talking past each other. So I want less of that in the world, so I can feel safer, so my family can feel safer, keep that autonomic nervous system nice and regulated, and yeah, I mean, I think that's ultimately that, and through that I just have more choice, you know.
Man, I'm really appreciating this. Thank you. This was a really wholesome and healthy conversation. As I was sharing some of what I shared, like it's fast, kind of quick, a little whimsical, whatever. But I like how you received it, and that how you did that. I'm gonna try and describe this. So basically, the way you received it is like, I had a fast energy. You noticed the fastness. You received it, and you had this sort of, this is that vortex kind of experience I felt when I first met you, and when I first discovered the power of that presencing power of circling and authentic relating. Is just sort of, hold on a second, let me just get right here.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a distinct sensation I'm feeling, and it's worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
um, there's such power in bringing awareness to those nuances, because it brings us here. I know it's like an excitable topic, it's really engaging the mind, but then we also have this like physical vessel that, if we're not tuning in to those sensations, we're kind of ignoring it a little bit, and those are real and super valid sensations that we're having on very serious subjects. So I think it's very important to also, while considering these things, be like, what's going on in here? And that was a missing puzzle piece for me, because I have been dealing with a lot of this upper, like mental stuff for a lot of my life. So coming into the body and being present with what's here has been a game changer for me.
Mm-hmm.
You just reminded me of that a few times in this conversation. How
Mm-hmm.
that's
I'm glad.
it's just embedded into your avatar character's personality.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. And again, like the way that we have this conversation, that's I still think there can be more elegance to it. But that's still, that thing is like, while we're talking about things and how we think about things, can we also notice what might be driving our perspective? There's the program in the matrix, and then looking underneath it, but what's really going on? Yes, this part's important. If we're going to make systemic positive changes in the world, we really need to realize how it is that we're influenced and what's at stake for us. So hearing you, say that was that you saw that was happening in the conversation, feels good. It means we're getting closer to doing this thing really well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Misha. Yeah, and I'm also left with like, oh my God, there's so many other things that I wanted to get to, because you were almost tying at the end to something else you shared at the beginning of the conversation, and wanted to go into that. So hopefully we do this again.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we can have another chat sometime. We can, if you want, we can do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll have to set it up. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.
Unless you had something you wanted to say.
No. Oh, good.